I'll yield now to my colleague and co-chair, Mr. Kildee. I'll be back in a moment.
Thank you. I yield myself 5 minutes for questions, but I first want to say I've been in Congress. This is my 12th year in Congress. I've sat through hundreds and hundreds of hearings. I don't think I've ever been so moved or compelled by the testimony that I've heard today. And I just want to assure you that for those of us on this dais, we leave even more firmly committed than ever before to try to do what we can to protect your rights to make your own decisions about your own futures, about your own health care, about your own bodies. So thank you so much for that. Ms. Timaraju, I wonder if you might comment a bit further. These anti-abortion extremists that we're all dealing with have worked to erode the rights of women to make their own decisions about their bodies and their future, but I think specifically there are particular challenges, and I wonder if you might speak to the connection between this most recent Alabama Supreme Court ruling on IVF and other post-Dobbs decisions to limit access to reproductive health care, and what you think the next phase of this Republican-led extreme anti-abortion agenda might actually look like.
Thanks for the question, and I also agree. I listen to these stories professionally, like for my job, every day, and the testimony today was incredibly devastating. As the parent of two 5-year-olds, the idea of my 4-year-old having to listen to any of that, it's disgusting. And I think all the testimony here today really underscores the urgency of action. But to your question, look, it's very clear that once Roe fell, it opened up just a landscape of devastation across the country, right? You've heard from the providers on this panel, and I was really struck by the point about exceptions, because we make this point all the time, that all of this is designed to be chaotic. It was not designed to be like an effective strategy. They frankly did not know what they were doing, and their goal was very simple. It was to exert power and control. I want to make it really clear that it's not about science, it's not about viability, it's not about exceptions, it's not about any kind of, fake medical junk science mumbo jumbo from the other side. It's about power and control and controlling people's bodies. And this is important because as in your roles, it's super easy to get caught up in these debates about weeks and months and what about this, exception. And I really discourage you from doing that, because when you think about the root cause analysis of these bans, it will clarify it. So to your question about what's next, we saw from Dobbs, you go from overturning Roe to Alabama Supreme Court. And what's the through line? What's the thread there? It's extremist views from many of your colleagues. The majority of Republicans in the House signed on to life begins at conception legislation. If you believe, logically or illogically, if your theology compels you to believe that concept, it does not end with IVF, right? It ends with birth control, the morning after pill. There's a reason those of us in the movement were fighting for decades to get Plan B in pharmacies. Maybe under the radar for most Americans, but not for those of us in the provider and advocacy communities, right? It's because they want pregnancy and they believe it is their sacred and moral duty to pursue it at all costs, right? They do not want us to stop pregnancy. So I could go down the rabbit hole of all the theology and the Project 2025 stuff you've been following in the news. But what's important to note is the Speaker of the House supports that ideology, believes it, and is a leader nationally and promoting it. So there is not a more important election and moment for you all to be raising the alarm with your colleagues. I do believe there are Republicans in this country, particularly the people, the voters, who are shocked and alarmed and do not agree with this direction, but their voices are not being heard and they need courage to come join the coalition.
Thank you for that. I wonder if I just might turn to our two physicians to comment just listening to your testimony and then listening to the stories that we've heard, it's obvious that your training, your oath, calls upon you to do what you can to serve the healthcare interests of the patients that you care for. Yet, under the laws that we are now seeing enacted, you quite literally, as a physician, could be imprisoned for following your oath and your training to provide the proper care that you believe is in the best interest of the patients that you serve, the people you know. And I wonder if you just might comment on the chilling effect that that threat has on the daily practices of physicians that are trying to meet the needs of the people that they are charged with serving. In either order. Go ahead. Dr. Wakovitz, go ahead.
Is it on?
Yes.
Back when I was in New York and abortion was legal, I had a patient who ended up with a medical emergency, acute pancreatitis, and she didn't make it to my hospital, and she ended up in a Catholic hospital. And she was pregnant at the time, and she became strongly convinced that the severity of her pancreatitis, which is sometimes a near fatal condition, would affect the pregnancy and that she should not continue with her pregnancy. Well, the hospital that she was in wouldn't allow it, and she had to get herself out of that hospital, still sick, and go to a hospital where they would honor all of her healthcare needs. That's my personal experience. One of my colleagues pointed out that he is a little bit scared to transfer in Dallas-Fort Worth Airport anymore when flying from Florida to Points West. Because when someone comes from out of state to have an abortion, they go home with their medical records in hand. And she or her referring doctor are not going to turn him in, but if an unfriendly person got a hold of that piece of paper, they could issue a warrant for his arrest. That's about the extent of my experience with that.
Thank you. We are tight on time. Dr. Richard, if you have a brief comment you'd like to make, then I'd like to recognize Representative Kelly.
It's difficult for me to be concise, but I'll try.
Yeah.
I think we all go into medicine for different reasons, but one thing that connects all physicians and healthcare providers is our dedication and upholding of medical ethics, whether it's patient autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, justice. These components, they draw us in, and we hold them very dear to us. And what happens when abortion laws go into effect? Patient autonomy, out the door.
Right.
It's nothing anymore. Justice, out the door. It's not there anymore. Doing no harm. No, we actually know that we are doing harm to our patients by banning and restricting abortion. And it's challenging, and I think from the community, our big ask is leave this to healthcare providers and patients and who they trust, whether it's family members or religious resources. Let the patients decide with their trusted allies what decision is best for them.
Thank you so very much. With that, I now recognize